So we talked about marketing. It was your 3 M's, and that's knowing your market, understanding your message, and then determining your method. In operations, your second pillar on there, what you're really looking for is making sure you're retaining your clients, because all growth starts when you stop shrinking. The best way to go ahead and retain your clients actually is by rounding them out, making sure you have eliminated the competition and that you're writing all of your clients' business. And the last thing is with referrals and making sure. And you can see how even those 3 go together, because you got to keep somebody. Part of the way you keep them is by having all their business. The best source of a referral is going to be those individuals who have all of their business with your agency. So the last pillar we'll talk about is really your sales 3 Ps. And then your sales, again, how are you closing what you get? And I see that with a lot of agents who focus on the first 2 things. They do great with their marketing. They have operations that got it smoothly worked out in there. Boy, then when it comes in, it lands on somebody's desk, those individuals sometimes can't sell with 3 wishes. And so a lot of it is, how are you managing the sales processes within your business? And the first thing is to make sure you have a personalized interaction. Do you understand your clients? Do your individuals know how to interact with them positively? You saw that before with the communication, effective communication face-to-face, 7% for what they actually say. So you could be technologically sound and do a horrible job, based on, nonverbals, tone of voice, and everything else, and never really understand why you're not closing. It's like I was going through my my homiletics training. They talk about how, sometimes people in ministry can be so heavenly minded they're of no earthly good. And that can be the same thing when you get that with the personalized interactions of not doing it towards your clients. This is a big one that we could spend a whole nother hour on, is doing the price versus your value. Actually, I had a call from somebody the other day. They were saving somebody $700 on their account and didn't write the account. And I'll tell you in a couple of minutes as far as what ended up being the bottom line to that, as far as why they didn't. And it's easily predictable, actually, that you wouldn't. And the last thing is with your philosophy, and that's where I really want you to think about that kind of when we get off the phone and make that as a determination. When you go through and here with your effective interaction is exactly that. It's really looking at, when you're going through, do you understand client styles that are on there, including your own? And there's a great book on there called, by Merrill and Reed, called Social Styles. And that's what it's looking at in here, and understanding your person's assertiveness versus non-assertiveness, if they're task-oriented versus people-oriented individuals. Knowing your own personal style then will help you from the same standpoint of going through and identifying your client's style that would actually be in there. And with your client style can very much be the standpoint of, how do you interact with them? Do you have any things actually in common with them? Or is that something that you have to go through and heavily adapt to? And like I say, again, that's a whole nother, it's probably spend another hour just on that aspect of it alone. What are you doing to adapt? If you're an expressive and you come into interaction with an amiable, or an analytic, you realize you're assertive, they're non-assertive, your people, their control. How are you going to actually adapt to them versus that whole sort of, one style fits all type of thing that we can go through? The other one is on the value versus price. First of all, as I said before, it all starts with marketing. You're going to get exactly what you ask for. So if you want somebody to go through and you're going to tell them, I'll save you $300, $400, $500 on there, then you cannot expect to have any other type of interaction with whoever responds to that. So it starts with your marketing. It continues in your conversation. In other words, when you're going through, and one of the questions that we used to ask in there is, other than price, what else is important to you when it comes to your insurance program? When we would talk with, I remember one of my earliest interactions where I was back at a company and I was in the boiler and machinery division, and one of the things that we did to go out and proactively solicit that, and this is years ago when it was still an endorsement on the policy, we proactively go after people who had like a diner or some sort of restaurant who didn't have equipment breakdown, and we would just ask them, how would your business be impacted if? And we go ahead and we give them a particular scenario and then be quiet. And you would have individuals come back and say, oh, John, I could go out of business, so that would cost me tens of thousands of dollars to recover from. So imagine how ridiculous it sounded when I wanted to then add a $5 a month endorsement to that business owner's policy. And you have to have that when you're talking about price is, don't start a conversation believing that they only want to have with price. Because you remember back, effective communication over the phone, 84% of that is your tone of voice. So if you answer the phone and you believe that this person's success is going to be dictated by getting them off the phone as quickly as possible, because who wants to talk to an insurance agent for long? And the second thing is, it's only going to be successful if I can save them money. And that's what happened with this young man I started to talk about before. When he went through and he kind of gave me a whole thing of, hey, here's what happened, blah, blah, blah. I'm reading through it, and I see absolutely no place in there where he ever determined what that client's need was. In other words, why are they shopping? And if they're shopping just to save price, is that the only thing that's important, or is there something else? What are their current coverages, and how does their needs line up with what their coverages are, and what are the gaps between those two things? I had one client one time, he lost a commercial account, and the client who left to go with another agent actually called him and told him, well, hey, here's the reason why I left you, is because this guy offered me 100% co-insurance, and you've only been giving me 80. Now, if I unmute it, I hear a lot of chuckling from the co-insurance, from the commercial lines client, agents on the phone right now, because you understand that only in golf and in insurance, on co-insurance, is ever 80 better than 100. And those are some of the things that we have to be able to have, and have those as our conversations. And again, I always tell people, rinse and repeat at renewal, because then you're going through and again reminding people why they do business with you. Finally, the stuff with your philosophy is, and as you see the different ones come on the board on there, a lot of it is, I always kind of ask people, you really think that these are your competitors? Because if it is, then again, you made it all about price and time. And this one here, it basically, fast and anonymous is how the general works. Those are the things. We're going to give you low rates. We're going to save you time. Safe Auto, again, has, you actually, Mortimer is their phrase, that they will find you the lowest rates possible. My question always is this your competition? Is this what it will sound like when I call your business and ask to interact with an insurance professional? And I know we get nervous because, oh, Google is now going to sell insurance, or Walmart's going to sell insurance, or somebody else. And for those of you who you don't sound any different than if I call an 800 number, if that sounds like you, then yeah, you should be nervous, because you can't compete with them. Warren Buffett says he spends close to $900 million a year advertising in the lizard, and he will give you 3 reasons why when you ask him, or 3 words when you ask him why, and those words are, because it works. And that's really the competition that you want to go against. If it is, then here's what ends up happening. And you see these everywhere that you go. I saw it out in one agency out in the Northwest when I was there. And when I was there to actually work with them on selling value, on changing what their philosophy was going to be. And this is the sign that they had on top of their roof. And I said to myself, well, it's interesting that you have that. So we talked about what his philosophy was going to be, and how he wanted to go ahead and talk about really giving people better coverages, making sure that they understood the value of their insurance. And I told him, I said, well, then you need to change your sign. And he's like, oh, John, I spent a whole lot of money on that. I can't do that. And I said, no. Here's my philosophy. Have you ever had somebody come in, low limits? Thank God you got them upsold, and you've gone through that. You talked about the value of it. You marketed that way differently and so forth. And thank God they did, because then they went to limits on an accident. And the young this auditor that was there, she said, oh, yeah, tell them about Dave. And sure enough, they had a client who had done that. And I just told them, I said, okay, then change your sign. And when they changed their sign, this is what they changed their sign to. Fascinating part was a couple of days later, a local reporter was going by that same office, saw the sign, intrigued him, went in, found out what was actually going on, ended up doing a newspaper story on that same situation on there. And a lot of it is it's going through and determining what your philosophy is going to be. So in kind of a summary, and then we'll take some questions if you have some on there, it's really kind of looking at growth in your business is going to be determined by how well you balance those three items of really making sure that one of them is not emphatically longer or wider or more stable than the other, but really looking at the marketing 3Ms. You know, who is your market? What's your message? What's your method that you're going to go to them? Your operational 3Rs. Retain your clients. Round out their lines of business and ask them for referrals to be a part of what you're doing. And then also with your sales 3Ps, you know, are you actually going through and showing what the difference is? How you talked about what you're doing with your pricing versus value, and does your agency have that type of philosophy for which to go ahead and build on all of these three things for it? So at that time, that's pretty much the end of mine. So if I'm not sure if Dickinson or somebody in the background needs to unmute everybody, or if that's something I do, and then we can go through and we can take some questions if you haven't. Any questions at all? Any comments?
All right, John, I do see that Stephanie, looks like Stephanie has a question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Stephanie. Stephanie, go ahead with your question. Stephanie? All right, looks like we lost Stephanie, but we do have Dick Davidson with a question. Dick, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Are we going to get this is going to be on a YouTube that we can watch or share with our staff, or a copy?
Yes, we do have the webinar recorded, and as soon as we get done here, we're going to upload it and send an email to all of you who attended with a copy of the link.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good information.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dick.
All right, we're going to try to go back to Stephanie here and seeing her hand is still raised. Stephanie, go ahead. Okay, looks like we lost Stephanie. It looks like that's all the questions. If you do have a question that you'd like to ask John, you can go ahead and click on the raise your hand icon, and we'll be happy to unmute your phones to answer your questions. Mike. All right, looks like we have Mike. Mike, go ahead. Mike, go ahead. You're unmuted. All right, looks like we lost Mike, and I see that Jeff has his hand raised there, but we don't see an actual device to unmute. I'm not sure if he disconnected from the phone or if his computer does not have the microphone. So, Jeff, you can just connect either via phone or the microphone on your computer. We'll be happy to unmute you. All right, looks like we got Mike again. Mike, go ahead. Mike, go ahead. Okay, looks like we're having trouble with Mike. Mike, you can go ahead and type your question also in the question window of the GoToWebinar panel. You'll find that at the very bottom of the panel. We'll be happy to answer your questions. Okay, looks like we got a question from, okay, looks like his device disconnected there. All right, Jeff, we do see that your hand is raised. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the phone or computer is connected for audio. So go ahead and type your question into the question window of the GoToWebinar panel. I'm sure John is standing by to answer that for you. All right, looks like we got a question from Doris. Doris, go ahead. Okay, Doris, it sounds like you have both either the phone and the computer on. That's the only time that it gives you that kind of feedback, so you probably have to disconnect from one of those before you'll be able to ask your question. Okay, John, it looks like we don't have any additional questions.
Okay, well that's great. I know. Well, actually, I'm looking at I finally found the question panel that was actually on there. So one of the ones that I see, and I appreciate all of the, I see all the other ones that were on there with the traveler's agency class, and folks have been in there. Thank you. Social Styles was mentioned again. What the author of that book was, that it was with Merrill and Reed. And if you just do a thing for Social Styles on there, then you'll find that. For those of you who are asking about any sort of consulting or coaching, yes, I do. You can go ahead and see my contact information down there at the bottom of the screen. And also, thanks for those of you who are saying you thought it was that well covered, that there's no questions. I've I've been accused of that in the past on there, so I appreciate that, and glad to see that you have any ideas. Ideas or concepts for a new agent. I see that from Mike SIS. I think if I'm looking at it from there, it's going through, look at those, I know it seems overly simplified, but those 3 M's, the 3 R's, the 3 P's have those. I think also one of the biggest things is part of, you've gotten through on things at QQ, use your agency management system daily, but don't just use it to go through and make sure that you get your downloads or any of the rest of that stuff. Use it as a communication tool with your clients. One of the biggest things that I tell people, get email addresses for every person that you actually write. If you're struggling with that, one of the best ways to do that is do not ask people if they have an email address. That's sales 101. Ask them instead, hey, Dave, what is the email address you check most often? What you're going to find is you will pull that, even because every time you send something out from your agency by letter instead of an email, you're taking $2 out of your pocket and basically throwing it in the trash. So you have to balance the types of things. Any regular sort of communication you want to have, email, text messages, preferred method of communication is going to be critical to you making sure that expenses, times, everything else is going on there. So good. I really I hope that helps out for you.
Okay, John, it looks like you had some additional questions inside the question window here. It looks like some people are still standing by to get some answers. Let me just go through the questions. Someone wanted to know if you were going to be in, northern Florida anytime soon.
Actually, I will be. I just talked with the folks in the PIA class, and I'm also a CPIA instructor, and so I will actually be in the Orlando area, both March and in April. So if there's some things going on there, I'm about ready to get out of this minus 13 degrees weather up here in the Adirondacks. So yes, I will be. I also see another one for the Northern Virginia area. I'm waiting until your snow clears up, and I'll come down there. But actually, and I'm kind of just in jest, I am traveling back and forth there. I'm actually speaking at the Newport News Tourist Bureau here in April as well. So I'll be in that area. So if there's anything else I can do for you from there, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me and ask.
All right, John, thank you very much for this helpful information. And everybody, we thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. As soon as we get the video uploaded, we will send you a link to the recorded webinar. Again, thank you very much for joining us today.